Greetings, blessings, and welcome to On the Brink Radio, broadcast number 325. This is Jeff Phillips Wefferson coming at you from central Tasmania. It's a rainy morning here on the Friday, the 12th of June. I think that if you're watching mainstream media right now, like CNN or something like that, especially in America, as I understand it, they're launching a media attack based on the second wave of the coronavirus attack. And I just can't tell you what complete bullshit I think that is, but if you think of it, what is terrorism? What does it mean to terrorize somebody? What is terror? And if this isn't terrorism, I don't know what is. And it's a textbook example of media terrorism. This is trying to make people afraid of something that they have no idea if it really exists or not. But it's by design to spread as much fear as possible, as quickly as possible. It's like igniting a flame when you're standing on ground soaked by gasoline. So the best solution for your peace of mind is to just not let that stuff into your mind. That's what my whole show last week was about, the necessity of critical thinking and filtering out infotoxin out of your mind. But this week's show is not about that at all. It's about not only implicitly the beauty and power of being here now and the beauty of nature and the beautiful gifts that we all have, but this show is honoring Dr. Rosalie Bertell and honoring, in a very sort of introductory way, the brilliant minds of Russia, with whom, a few of whom I've become familiar with in recent years. But the more you delve into it, it's just a vast reservoir of some of the most advanced thinkers and brilliant creative minds and scientists and everybody that the earth has ever seen, but so stigmatized and demonized by the whole Western world that Western education has included, at least mine, included very little from Russian scientists. I mean, of course, you've got some of the main people whose names we would recognize, for example, like the composers Stravinsky and Tchaikovsky. And anyway, but first I want to talk about Dr. Rosalie Bertell. She was a medical doctor and researcher, and who then became a very vanguard, leading-edge, firebrand educator and activist, addressing some of the major environmental and human health issues on the whole planet. And I've talked with her. I didn't actually meet her, but I communicated with her via email. And very interestingly, right before she passed away on the 14th of June 2012, which was in 2 days, it'll be 8 years ago. I remember that day. Elizabeth and I were on Great Barrier Island, and there was one of the most beautiful atmospheric optical phenomena that I've ever experienced. It was kind of like, well, there was one of the most brilliant double rainbows I've ever seen, but not only that, it was as if the whole sky was filled with colors. And we stood outside and photographed it for a long, long time. And only, I think, the next day or two, I realized that was when Rosalie had passed away. But just a couple of weeks before that, she emailed me and asked my permission for her to reprint part of an article that I had written about whales and dolphins and the damage that we're inflicting on them. This had to do with our use of hydrocarbons and the petroleum and oil industry and automobiles and stuff like that. Wish I had got to meet her, but she's one of my truest heroes, a true Rachel Carson of today. I believe I first heard of her because of my nuclear awareness activism that really began in 1986 when I was at Big Mountain when the Chernobyl meltdown happened. But around 2003, and there I was getting in touch with an Australian filmmaker named David Bradbury, who made a couple of really brilliant films, and what I consider to still be two of the best educational films about the nuclear scenario. He made a film called Blowin' in the Wind about depleted uranium, and he made a follow-up called A Hard Rain, which took a little broader look at the global nuclear scenario. But in A Hard Rain, he actually interviewed Rosalie Bertell, talking about the nuclear scenario. And I'm not sure if I had, that was when I first heard of her, but I had come into her work because she had a book called No Immediate Danger, Prognosis for a Radioactive Earth, or something like that, Prognosis for a Radioactive Planet. And it was a very in-depth look at the true nature of the global nuclear scenario and how incredibly dangerous it is. And even one of her articles at that time was called we don't have to commit suicide, by implication that we already have. It's like the trigger has been pulled and the bullet's on its way toward us with the nuclear scenario. Not many people have the ability or the broadness of mind or scope of intelligence or the backbone and balls and willpower to even address or embrace or comprehend the truly astronomically dangerous aspects of the whole global nuclear scenario, which is now greater than ever. It's not like that if we just don't think about it, it's gone away, although that's how it seems to be sometimes. And so over the next few years, I became more and more familiar with her work. And then I read her book called Planet Earth, Latest Weapon of War, that was published, I think, in around 1990. And in that book, she really started putting together the whole new paradigm of what you might call environmental or geophysical warfare, talking about things like HARP and DARN and all these sort of ionospheric heaters, sort of picking up where Dr. Nick Begich had informed us greatly about this whole new paradigm of planetary weaponization. So Rosalie was a firebrand activist, and she became friends with Dr. Claudia von Werloff in Austria, who they worked together, and Claudia's organization has published Rosalie's book in many languages and a new edition that I haven't seen yet. And so Rosalie's torch is being carried by Claudia von Werloff. But their message, they're two of the top true Rachels Carson of today, in the sense of the importance of their messages.
For many years, there have been two parts of society: the military, which tends to be very secret, and then the civilian, that includes all the people that are not military. And the military secrecy is directed toward the people who support that military, which is rather incredible. I had this initial contact with depleted uranium, and when I found they used it in war, I found it hard to believe that they would do something like this. I mean, they're basically throwing radioactive waste at your enemy. Not only did they spread it all over the desert in southern Iraq and the northern part of Kuwait, but the Bedouin were coming in sick. And they also contaminated their own people. So this was the Gulf War illness. I think one of the basic mechanisms was this depleted uranium. And when it came to trying to prove that it was harmless, which of course the military tried to do, they took the money that Congress had implemented and they gave it to a firm out in California, the Rand Corporation, and told them to do a search of the literature. Well, this had never been used as a weapon in war before, so there wasn't any literature. So they used the literature of uranium mining, and I'll explain in a minute the difference between uranium mining and using it in war. But when you use this uranium in war, the nature of uranium is to be pyrophoric. If you had uranium here at room temperature in fine granules, it would burst into flames. It's pyrophoric. Now, when it is used in war, it hits a hardened target. You get a pyrophoric response. You'll get a flame. It's a very hot flame, and it changed the nature of war as far as I can tell, because uranium burns at 3,000 to 6,000 degrees centigrade, whereas TNT burns at 576 degrees centigrade. So there's a huge difference between those temperatures. So you've got an extremely high temperature fire. It's high enough to vaporize whatever metal is in the target. It's the target that will vaporize. So your uranium vapor will contain radioactive uranium, which is now... I would just like to say a few things about what these very small particles of DU do inside of the human body. We already know that it's very easy for them to get in through the lungs, because the lungs have no protection. They just have a barrier between the lung and the blood. And normally something that gets into the lungs has to dissolve to get through that barrier. But the nanoparticles, which are produced with the burning of uranium, they're small enough to go right through into the blood. Now, just to give you an idea of the difference between a larger particle, larger meaning in the micron range, say 2 micron particle, which is small enough to get to the deep part of the lung. It would have to dissolve to get through and into the bloodstream. But suppose instead of that 2 micron particle, you had 2,000 1 nano-sized particle. Now, 2,000 particles that are nano-sized will go right through not only into the blood vessels, but they can get from the blood vessels into the cells. The larger particle would stay in the blood vessels. Now, if you think of the surface area and imagine this 2 micron particle, it has a minimum surface area for volume if it's a sphere of diameter 2 microns. But when you break it up into 2,000 nanoparticles, it's still the same amount of uranium, but the surface area has increased tremendously. And it's this surface area that releases the radioactive particles. So now you have 2 larger particles will tend to dissolve, stay in the arteries or veins, and they'll be cleaned in the liver, and then some will be sent to be stored in the bone, and others will be sent to the kidneys for release. So the smaller particles are too small to be filtered out by the kidney tubules, so they tend to stay in the body a long time. Now, a radiation dose is depending on 2 things. One is how strong the source is. Think about how strong the sun is. And the second thing is how long you're exposed. So that's like sitting out in the sun for an hour or sitting out for 5 hours. There's a difference in what happens to you. So these particles that go through the body quickly and are eliminated by the urine are different from the ones that can stay in the body for the rest of your life. So that it's the length of time here which adds to the severity of the dose. Now, what could they do if they get into the cells? Well, one of the things that the cells do is they make all of the proteins and hormones and enzymes that we need for the body. So in the DNA, which is in the nucleus of the cell, it reproduces itself in pieces. These are what the genes do. And we have billions of genes. And these genes make the protein. They say what's going to happen all down the line of the protein, what goes into it, and then they send it out of the nucleus into the more fluid part of the cell in which the nucleus rests. Now, in that fluid part of the cell, the protein will take a specific form, three-dimensional form. It might curl up and it fold in on itself, and it takes a very beautiful and very particular three-dimensional form depending on how it's going to work in the body. And it's very important to take the right form. Now, if you have heavy metals and uranium inside of the cell tissue, it can disrupt the form of that protein so that the protein doesn't act properly. It doesn't function. It's got all the right things in it, but if it's not shaped right, it won't fit into the place it's supposed to fit in.
I'm kind of a metal detector guy, and so I've got a few metal detectors. This is a decent one. It's not that great, but anyway, it has settings that I never use. Basically, they go really high, and I just discovered something pretty scary to me, and I'm hoping, obviously, I'll get a lot of people trying this where you live, but it scared the hell out of me. Anyway, so let's turn this up all the way, and I want to show you something. It's very, very sensitive. Okay, it picks up basically anything metal real easy. Okay, real easy. What I'm going to do is I want to show you, we had some beautiful snow last night in the mountains. When I took the metal detector out, watch what happens. Let me just show you. Okay. As far as I know, there shouldn't be any metal here. I've checked it very well. This was never a garbage dump. What was? You're going to have to get right up here with the camera for it to pick up that sound. So basically what we've got going here is there's metal all across the entire floor of the desert. So try this at home, and let's see what you guys get, because this is insanity. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you a demonstration. Watch what it sounds like. Watch what sounds similar to this. See what that is? Those are staples from my chemtrail sign that I did the other day. Sounds a lot like that desert, doesn't it? Little particles of metal. But hell, the ones in the desert are almost as strong as those damn staples. That's fucking crazy, man. That's wrong. That is wrong. Oh my God. Okay, let's go.
Also, you know where a puddle is.
Go ahead and go that way a little.
Metal can go puddle in there.
I'd like to introduce our next person, our next special guest, Claudia von Berkel, with these words. Claudia von Berkel who's professor at the Institute of Political Sciences at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. She's a pioneer. She's in establishing the academic research subject into women's issues. Since 1988, she's been at that university, holding the chair for research into women's issues. Claudia has had an extensive experience working in research projects in several countries, including Central America and Venezuela, on the International Division of Labor, Women, Underdevelopment, and Agriculture. Her doctoral thesis dealt with questions concerning women in agriculture in developing countries. Claudia's core theoretical work is concerned with feminist theory of society, patriarchy, and technology, social movements, and ecofeminism. She's an activist in these areas. She questions globalization and looks to exploring alternatives to our present way of life. This is the foundation of her recent book, which you'll talk about, The Global Economic Crisis, the Great Depression of the 21st Century. Together, Claudia and Rosalie founded the Planetary Movement for Planet Earth in the year 2010. She worked closely with Rosalie on issues related to the viability of life on Earth, such as those raised in Rosalie's book, Planet Earth, the latest weapon of war. And this is something as Claudia gets ready to come up and speak to you. Some thoughts. Is there an alternative to plundering the earth? Is there an alternative to making war? Is there an alternative to destroying the planet? And with that, I give you Claudia.
Rosalie has infected me. She has reflected on me my own intent to clarify our thinking, now even in fields so alien like the military sciences, and to rely on our love, this enormous capacity that gives us the strength to do much more than we are supposed to, and that gives us the vision we need to do it. Loving means to be able to do things that have nothing to do with egoism, and love is the biggest power that keeps everything on earth related, united, alive, and bonded. Love is the real and only anti-power against those who want to transform our world into a mega machine under their control, and who do not hesitate to destroy it on their way. I have called this project military alchemy, because it is obviously part of the intent to transform everything on earth into its opposite, a utopia which we call patriarchy. Rosalie was enthusiastic about this concept of military alchemy that relates to our paradigm of the critical theory of patriarchy, as we call it. She even wanted to take military alchemy as the title of her book's new edition. Maybe we should really take it. The three shocks I went through were appalling. Something called upon me, it took me and shook me, it made me suffer, it made me ill, desperate and so terribly sad. I went through hell again and again. This something told me, you are the one, you have to do it, you have to start a movement to protect the earth. And I got it. I became healthy, I became furious, I became strong. I said, okay, yes, I'm here, I'm doing it, whatever it means for my further life. At a spiritual political women's congress in 2010 in Germany, with about 600 participants from around the world, I proposed the foundation of the planetary movement for Mother Earth, and most of the women were enthusiastic about it, so we founded it. And we started to inform the public and our members with our website and information letters, always in 3 languages, 6 until today. And we did the most important thing. We gathered the money, found a very good translator, and translated Rosalie's Planet Earth into German, including her latest findings from the year 2000 to 2011, and including contributions from ecofeminist Vandana Shiva, India, from ethicist Clive Hamilton, Australia, from a German lawyer, a specialist in ecology, and a German activist against chemtrails. We even managed to publish this book, titled in German Kriegswaffe Planet Erde, 500 pages, all included, 5,000 copies, first edition, at a reasonable price, but with a horrible publisher. All the other publishers said, no, this is beyond our program, this is feminist, this is conspiracy theory. It was a battle we had to fight into every direction, but we made it. Nobody could finally prevent the book from appearing in Germany, and Rosalie had wanted it so much, as so many German scientists like Werner von Braun, who had later been adopted by NASA, have contributed to developing the new weapons, first nuclear ones, then these energy weapons which use the Earth's magnetic fields and electromagnetic waves in order to be able to destroy the Earth and us wherever they want. We are happy and proud that Rosalie experienced the German edition of her book before she passed. Her former book, for which she got the Right Livelihood Award, No Immediate Danger, The Future of a Radioactive Earth, appeared in German as well in 1987. The nuclear dangers were her main and lifelong topic, and only later in her life, she, as one of the first scientists, discovered the post-nuclear weaponry has been developed at the same time, especially in view of the Fukushima catastrophe in 2011, which is several hundreds or even 1,000 times larger than that of Chernobyl. Both of Rosalie's books have to be read and analyzed again. We will need it when the results of the Fukushima disaster, which has probably also not been simply a natural catastrophe, can no longer be swept under the carpet. We know that Rosalie was working on a second edition of Planet Earth in English. Together with her book on the nuclear dangers, it is going to be the eye-opener for many people in the whole world and for many years to come. We therefore are now calling the two publishers she was in contact with, one in the United States and one here in Canada. We do not know who you are. Please contact us so that we can finish what Rosalie had started. There is not much more to do. And finally, we have begun a Spanish translation for which we still need support and money. In the meantime, we have found a Mexican publisher, and we want that indigenous peoples of the Pachamama movement in Latin America can read it. So when the people in Mexico knew about the harm that is done to our Pachamama, they started to cry. Imagine the difference to the reaction of people in Germany who started to shout at us instead. This is development. I met Rosalie personally in Bonn, Germany in September 2010 when the Right Livelihood Award had its 30th anniversary. I will never forget how she looked at me with eyes radiant like black diamonds. We had already become friends. This is because we are acting out of the same motive. The war against life must end, the ongoing destruction has to be stopped. The risk of damaging the whole planet and our general living conditions must not be allowed, and worldwide so. We stand up for Mother Earth. Rosalie, we miss you. Rosalie, we need you. We want to be your heirs. We promise your work will be continued. For this I feel responsible. And we are already beginning with it, making a film about her life. Thank you, Grey Nuns of the Sacred Heart. Thank you, members of the International Institute of Concern for Public Health. Without you and your love for and support, Rosalie would not have been able to do all the incredible things she did. Thank you.
Yes, I think I neglected to mention that Rosalie Bertell was a very unique person in the sense that she was a fully ordained and active Catholic nun, as well as a medical doctor, and as well as an outspoken awareness and educator on issues of the greatest level of significance to the well-being and health of life on Earth, the global nuclear scenario, and then the whole weaponization of geophysical warfare. And so she was an extraordinarily beautiful and well-loved person with a message that's totally unique. And I really have to honor her, Rosalie Bertell, and her successor, Dr. Claudia von Werloff, who is carrying on her work and her torch. And I've interviewed Claudia on my show several times. And she deals with the history of the patriarchy and the hatred of life that seems to define modern man's relationship with the world of nature. Very, very brilliant work, and she's been exposing the whole climate change fraud and the coronavirus fraud and everything, and I'm looking forward to trying to do a new show with her soon. But you've just heard Rosalie Bertell herself talking about depleted uranium, and then Claudia von Werloff addressing an audience in Australia, I think, or about in honor of Rosalie, and that was a few years ago. So anyway, Rosalie Bertell and Claudia von Werloff, two of the most beautiful Rachels Carson of today that I've ever had the blessing to know or interact with or communicate with. And now, for part 2 of the show, I'd like to talk about some of my favorite Russian minds. And like I was saying before, Russia is physically the largest country on the planet. They've got more oil than anybody else. They're a very ancient culture, maybe not ancient in the sense of India or Australia, but for a Western culture, it's a lot older than America, for example. But because of the what used to be called the Cold War, the Iron Curtain and everything, all of the Russian scientists and researchers were pretty much behind that. And, you know, it's something that the more in recent years I've learned, there's been specific people that I've got onto because of their work, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But before that, you know, you've got the stereotypes of Russian vodka. You know, we know the leaders of all the countries. There was Khrushchev, and there was Gorbachev, and then there was Boris Yeltsin, and then now Vladimir Putin, and all these people. These are all the public image stereotypes. And when I think of Russian names, I think of the ones that stand out to me are, of course, the composers Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky, the writers Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn, also a lesser-known but very important writer of negative utopias along the supposedly his book called We inspired the writing of both Brave New World in 1984 by George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. His name is Zamyatin, Zamyatin. We've also got Pavlov, the behavioral psychologist that had a lot to do with dogs salivating to bells. You've got the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. Very interesting. You've also got, now we're going back in time here to the history of science, but Mendeleev is the Russian scientist who not only created the whole periodic table of the elements, he also propounded the theory or hypothesis that hydrocarbons are not fossil fuels, but that they are abiogenic, that is, that they're created by geochemical processes deep in the Earth's mantle. So, some of my favorite scientists are, well, okay, there's a Russian painter named Vasily Kandinsky, and he's very significant in my life, not only because I have come to like some of his paintings, ones I've seen, but in 1978 or 79, when I'd only been painting less than a year, a professor of art at the University of Richmond in Virginia saw a painting that I had just done, and he said, Jeff, you're the Kandinsky of today. And I had no idea at that time what that meant at all. I had never studied art. My background was in science. And I go like, oh, well, that's cool. But I didn't really, but only many years later did I realize what a massive compliment that was, a legendary compliment, that an art professor should tell me that I'm the Kandinsky of today, because I learned that Kandinsky was known in art historical circles as the father of abstraction. He was the first Western artist that we know of who sort of deviated from the tradition of painting portraits and landscapes and fruits and vegetables and flowers and stuff like that to painting fully abstract paintings with just geometrical forms. And then he moved on into the domain of symbols and that kind of thing. And so I can see what this professor was talking about, and the painting that he was looking at is a style that I kind of call visual noise. It's kind of a field of patterns and colors that could be like flowers or fireworks, or visual noise in the sense that it's kind of a projection screen for whatever your mind's eye would like to see. And so it's like I took the abstraction thing to the next level, where there's really not even any specific pattern except kind of at the squiggles at the microscopic level, that you see your own pattern in there rather than being told what to think, which I think is that's what I like about non-representational art. It engages the viewer at a more creative level. So Kandinsky. Then there was a Russian biologist and nuclear researcher named Alexei Yablokov. That's Yablokov. And I got in touch with him about 10 years ago because he was the co-author of this book, along with the Nestorenko brothers, on the biological and health effects of the Chernobyl event that happened in Russia. And so I communicated with him, and he sent me an autographed copy of this book. And I was going to do an interview with him, and his English wasn't very good, and so I even had my interview translated into Russian, but then he declined to do it on the basis that he didn't have time and that his English wasn't good enough, so that was quite sad. And then he passed away a few years ago. Another famous astronomer is named Joseph Shklovsky. That's Shklovsky. And he co-edited a book with Carl Sagan about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or communication with extraterrestrial intelligence. So this was legendary work. And with my blog post, I'll put references to the work of all these people. I'm not going to try to read from it now. Then I'd like to thank researcher William Engdahl for his expose of the abiogenic hydrocarbon situation, and the Russian scientist that he met who did a presentation in Santa Fe in the mid-90s about all this, and his name is V.A. Krayushin, Krayushin. He was one of the Russian scientists who did early research establishing the veracity of the abiogenic hydrocarbon hypothesis. Then you've got Evgeny Marhunin. That's, I believe I've got the spelling right, Marhunin. Apparently he never published anything in English, although I did find some references to his work. But my friend Julia Natsimova, she's my very, very, very favorite Russian person. My massage therapist, geologist friend who lives in the South Island of New Zealand. I just talked with her today, in fact. She's a geologist by profession, and she told me about Marhunin and his work with the origin of life in volcanoes, which is very, very interesting. And I've always been wanting to learn more about his work and find out more about these ideas. I also learned that Russian scientists were some of the earliest minds to understand the extreme danger of microwaves to biological organisms. And so they, ever since like the 1950s, back when the U.S. military was insisting that microwave levels be set based on the thermal model, that is the level at which microwaves create heating, which is 1,000 times higher than the level at which negative biological effects begin to occur. So that they set the safety levels for microwaves at the level of biological effects in Russia. So they're being exposed to 1,000 times less than us because their scientists understood what it was all along. There's a specific Russian comet astronomer whose work I was reading, but I can't remember his name right now. I can't seem to find it. When I look through these lists, there's so many of these scientists whose work I'd really like to check out more. But Glenn Edney, in my interview with him a couple of weeks ago on Mother Ocean, he mentioned a guy named Vernadsky, who I think is a very interesting sort of multidisciplinary thinker. He's somebody whose work is worth checking into. I don't think he invented the term noosphere, which is sort of the domain of mind, but I think he popularized it as well as the word biosphere. But he was kind of like a broadband, full-spectrum Renaissance mind. Vernadsky. He was also well respected by Jose Arguelles, the Mayan scholar and visionary artist. But now to my very favorite Russian mind that I know of historically is, of course, Emanuel Velikovsky, who I've talked about probably on half of all of my shows that I've done. Emanuel Velikovsky was a psychoanalyst by profession who studied under Sigmund Freud along with Carl Jung and Adler and other people like that, a very major mind, and he became interested in how different cultures have the same sort of catastrophic events, like floods, for example, that they talk about. And he reckoned that the fact that all these different cultures in different parts of the world had the same story meant that this was something that really happened, not just a myth or a metaphor. So he explored that, and then he started exploring his hypothesis that planetary catastrophes have happened constantly throughout the history of the Earth. And he looked at both cultural and geological evidence for these. And his hypothesis was that humanity as a whole has been traumatized so thoroughly and so repeatedly by these planetary level disasters that we are in sort of a permanent state of traumatization, and that our cognitive, especially our abilities to remember all this stuff, have been compromised, and that we're repressing all of these heavy memories that's in our collective conscious, maybe even our genetic memory, and that these memories were so horrific of what we've managed to live through that we, rather than address them, we suppress them, and therefore they exert a lot of influence on our behaviors of today, which to me translates into, if we're denying the fact that we've almost been wiped out so many times, it could be that the effect of this on our behaviors, that we're forcing ourselves to act out our own self-destruction again. And when you look around, we seem to be doing a pretty good job of that with the whole military-industrial complex and the wave of self-induced pandemics, and just everything that we seem to be foisting on each other seems to be rooted in that kind of behavior. So anyway, Russia has produced a lot of brilliant minds, but I'd really like to extend my beautiful love and blessings and thanks to my friend Julia Natsamova, who I've known for about 3 or 4 years, and she is a geologist living in Takaka, New Zealand. She's the only massage person who I'll let put their hands on me, and she's done so much fantastic healing work on me. She's certified in Reiki, and also she studies shiatsu, and she's certified in Russian massage and other kinds of massage. And so I'd really like to thank her and give her a big hug, and thank all the beautiful minds from Russia, all the artists and writers and musicians and philosophers and scientists. And I'd like to learn more about all of their work. I'd like to thank Dr. Rosalie Bertell and Claudia von Werloff and Jill Stanley at UCY-TV and all the Rachel Skarsenovs today, and all my beautiful friends. And turn off the TV and you won't be terrorized anymore. All right, I better go and edit this show and upload it. This is Jeff Phillips Wefferson sending you heaps of love from chilly and rainy Tasmania today, and I'm hoping to be up in the top end in Darwin by the end of June for some beautiful, nice, warm weather, and back to my beautiful home of Aotea sometime in the not-too-distant future. May God bless everybody, and may Goddess bless everybody. Please live simply so that others may simply live. Walk in beauty with a grateful heart that can be a magnet for miracles. This is Jeff Phillips signing off, and also Teddy, Wally, Ruby Ann, Big Teddy, Heidi, Phil, Huckleberry, Ellie, and Kylie, and Peter Platypus want to say hello. Oh, everybody, this is Jeff's family of creatures, and we love you. We want to send beautiful blessings from Tasmania. We want to do an interview soon. Yes, we'll be doing an interview soon with the family. We might even record one down by the river as soon as it stops raining here. All right. Keep it in the road, as my uncle used to say. Bye-bye.
Thank you.